The warmth of bacon and fresh coffee hung in the diner air as laughter at the counter sharpened into a cutting remark that traveled farther than it should have. The hiss from the griddle and the jukebox's mellow brass did little to soften the sting of neighbors doubting her worth, their easy chuckles pressing into the quiet of her booth like unwelcome hands. Ellie Hart, a widow who had learned long ago to move carefully through other people's words, steadied her porcelain mug, the steam curling into her face as though to hide her blush. The room was alive with sound forks striking plates, a door chime jingling, a boy's sudden question pitched with more curiosity than tact, yet, within it, the remark about her place in the world hung louder than any clatter. She smoothed the cuff of her sweater fingertips, brushing the worn handle of the mug, as if anchoring herself to something ordinary. Around her, the scent of pine from a too-early wreath mingled with maple syrup, weaving the scene into something unmistakably small-town, unmistakably public, and yet quietly bruising. Ellie Hart, 67. Widow sat with her shoulders straight, while the compass hidden in her purse pressed lightly against her side, a weight she chose not to reveal. Across the room, the flags taped to the window flapped with each gust through the door, and the jukebox slid into a softer tune as if conspiring to offer her cover. But no music could quite erase the way words can bite when spoken aloud. What happens when an ordinary morning with its steam and chatter leaves someone marked by silence more powerful than reply? Veterans Day dawned crisp and bright in Maplewood, Maine. Ellie Hart sat at her usual corner booth in Betty's diner, steam curling from her coffee. Paper flags were taped to the windows, trembling whenever the door swung open. The room carried its familiar morning music, chair legs scraping plates, clattering bacon sizzling on the griddle. From the jukebox came a mellow horn tune that had drifted through mornings here for decades. Ellie chose this booth because she could see both the window and the door, a habit that made her feel steady. Mary arrived with a coffee pot, already tilted. "Top you off, Miss Ellie." Ellie smiled. "You always know." "On the house today," Mary said, sliding a creamer across the table. "Then I'll leave too big a tip tomorrow." Mary winked. "You always do." Ellie shifted her purse as Mary set down pancakes. A slim chain slipped into view, the silver compass glinting before it vanished under her handkerchief. No one noticed. Ellie let her palm rest against it a moment, as though it could anchor her against the tide of voices. At the counter, Frank Dwyer leaned toward a friend voice pitched for the room. "Even SEAL snipers miss, imagine her claiming anything." His chuckle was sharp, aimed like a dart. Ellie didn't turn. The sentence slid through the diner all the same. She focused on butter melting into her pancakes, tried to let the clatter of forks cover the sting. Mary's smile softened as she topped off Ellie's cup again. "You're all set, hon. I'm fine," Ellie said, grateful for the shield hidden in Mary's voice. Two young veterans crowded into the booth behind her jackets, smelling faintly of cold air. They joked about the parade being short this year, the brass hurrying in the chill. Their laughter snapped and broke, making Ellie's shoulders tighten. Joe sat as always in the back booth, pencil scratching on a crossword. He glanced up, offered a nod that Ellie returned with the smallest lift of her chin. Some greetings didn't need words. Frank's voice carried again. "Stories grow in the telling. Next thing you know, folks start mistaking presents for proof." He tapped the counter with his ring. His companion looked down at his eggs. Ellie cut another bite, chewing slowly. Silence was armor, though thin. She remembered her husband teaching her that sometimes the best answer was letting the other man's words fall flat. Still, she felt her cheeks warm. The door jingled as two teenagers in varsity jackets entered loud with energy. One leaned back to glance at Ellie. Did you ever, do much for Veterans Day? His tone hovered between respect and mockery. Ellie folded her napkin, met his gaze. I try to do what I can. Her voice was calm, even. The boy colored, looking away quickly. Mary set down a plate before them with a sharp smile. Eat before it gets cold, or I'll tell your mothers. The table broke into laughter. The tension thinned. Ellie breathed in the room again, bacon coffee, a wreath's pine scent, the scrape of forks. The jukebox shifted into Bing Crosby, and for a moment the diner felt warmer. Mary slipped the check under Ellie's saucer. Ellie slid it back. We already discussed this. Consider it a community investment, Mary replied. She poured a small to-go cup and set it down. For the parade. Ellie's lips curved. She scribbled a note on the back of an old coupon, thank you for seeing people, not just orders, and tucked it beneath the sugar caddy. She gathered her purse, smoothing the cuff of her sweater, a small ritual like aligning a picture frame. The strap found its place on her shoulder. Inside, the compass pressed lightly against the folded handkerchief, reminding her of weight carried quietly. At the door, Ellie paused to let a family in. The little girl glanced up, met her eyes, and offered a spontaneous smile. Ellie returned, it warmed by the honesty only children give. Outside, the air was sharper, carrying the smell of salt from the bay and something metallic. Across the street, men set up folding chairs for the parade. A boy practiced drum rolls on his thighs, eager for the marching band to begin. Ellie lingered a moment, hearing the muffled life of the diner at her back, voices, dishes, the jukebox, humming through another verse. She knew the world could meet you with applause or with silence. That morning she chose the silence, holding it like a steady friend. Ellie leaves diner, stepping into November wind, clutching her purse tighter around the hidden compass. That afternoon, Ellie joins the line at Maplewood's post office, arms full of donated coats for the church drive. The lobby air was sharp with November cold, every swing of the glass door pulling in another draft. The bulletin board sagged with notices, bake sale flyers, a choir rehearsal card, a coat drive poster pinned unevenly. The clerk behind the glass was busy with envelopes, talking about Friday's football game. Ellie shifted the bundle on her hip and set down a box to rest her arms. As she bent, a thin chain slipped from her purse, catching a slice of pale sun. The compass glinted once, then vanished. Carol, 2 places behind, noticed her librarian's eyes tilting with quiet curiosity. Near the counter, Frank Dwyer stood with a thick envelope, his voice pitched for the room. She clings to old trinkets, doesn't mean she ever mattered. A couple of neighbors chuckled softly, as if agreement was easier than silence. Ellie's face warmed. She straightened the coat drive poster with her free hand smoothing its curling corner. The coat smelled faintly of cedar, and she held to that steadiness like a rail. It's busy today, Carol murmured when they moved up in line. You brought the good woolens. They'll keep somebody warm, Ellie said, eyes fixed ahead. When her turn came, the clerk smiled kindly. Church drive, God bless. She signed the form and stepped aside. Behind her, the line closed and the bell rang for a new customer. The wake of Frank's words lingered in her chest. Outside, the afternoon had sharpened into a thin wind. Across the street, the thrift store propped its door with a crate and a stack of paperbacks. A clerk in a cardigan balanced on a stool beneath a stubborn wall clock, sighing as the second hand twitched and stalled. Ellie hesitated, then stepped inside. The shop smelled of mothballs, cedar, and old wool. May I? She asked. If you want to try. The clerk said, half defeated. Ellie lifted the clock down gently. The battery contacts were green, the pendulum mount slightly off. She cleaned the contacts with a pencil eraser, tightened a screw with the edge of a coin, and rehung the clock until it sat square. The second hand jerked once, then began a steady tick. She listened not to the sound, but to the rhythm, even and sure. The clerk grinned. "Never knew you had the touch, Ms. Hart." "Old radios and stubborn toasters taught me patience," Ellie said, smiling, as she lifted her purse. The chain shifted again. The compass gave another small gleam. Carol had followed her inside. She looked from the purse to Ellie's face. "I thought I saw that earlier," she said softly. "Your compass, it looked familiar. I may have seen one like it in our archives. Perhaps a photograph, maybe even a ledger note." Ellie's hand closed over the bag. Habit more than secrecy. "There's an engraving," she admitted, cautious. Carol nodded. "I remember initials. We keep records of lives most forget. Quiet ones, too." Ellie considered brushing it off. The sting from the post office still smarted, and turning away would be easier. But the clock above her ticked evenly, proof of small repairs that mattered. She looked at Carol. "You think it's there?" "I do," Carol said. "I could pull the boxes. After story time tomorrow, I'll make tea." Ellie adjusted the strap on her shoulder. The compass pressed against her handkerchief, cool and solid. She thought of the coats she had left behind, of warmth carried into other homes. Small actions. Small steps. She whispered so low only she could hear. "Maybe it's time." The following weekend, Ellie steps into the quiet library, the air heavy with the smell of old paper and lemon polish. Afternoon light pressed through tall windows, turning dust motes into drifting gold. The building hummed with a muted dignity, the kind of silence that carried weight instead of emptiness. Carol waved her over from a corner table in the archives. A worn folder lay open, its edges softened by decades of handling. "I think I found what you need," Carol said. She eased the folder toward Ellie. Inside was a faded photograph of a compass, its lid slightly ajar. The engraving was faint but legible, EH followed by a string of numbers that looked like a unit code. Ellie's breath caught. She brushed her fingers lightly over the image as though afraid the paper would crumble. "Where did this come from?" "The records say it was logged as a commendation," Carol explained. "An item awarded after a rescue decades ago. But the name attached was redacted, probably classified at the time." She looked up, her expression steady. "Still, that engraving matches yours exactly." Ellie opened her purse with reluctant hands and drew out her compass. The lid flipped, revealing the same initials, dulled but clear enough in the afternoon light. She laid it beside the photograph. Side by side, the two were nearly identical twin pieces of a story she had never wanted to tell aloud. Her voice wavered. "People already laugh. They'll say I made this up too." Carol shook her head gently. "Records don't lie, Ellie. The archives aren't gossip. They're history. Yours deserves a place in it." Ellie closed the compass and wrapped it in her handkerchief, the cool metal pressing into her palm. The thought of standing in front of townsfolk, some of whom had dismissed her so casually, felt like walking into a storm without an umbrella. From the far end of the hall came the faint stir of voices. The church choir was rehearsing in the adjoining sanctuary, their warm-up notes drifting through the walls like threads of comfort. A familiar voice joined them, Pastor Ruth, her tones clear and calm. A moment later, she stepped into the archive room, coat draped over her arm. I couldn't help overhearing Ruth said, her smile kind, not prying. "Silence has its place, but sometimes silence is mistaken for consent." Ellie looked down. "If I speak, they'll tear me apart. If I stay quiet, maybe they'll just forget me." Ruth laid a hand on the folder, her touch firm but gentle. "Forgetting is easy. Healing isn't. The difference comes when someone is willing to step forward." Her eyes softened. "You don't have to give them every detail. just enough to remind them that truth stands taller than laughter. The choir began a hymn, voices rising through the rafters, a melody old as the town itself. Ellie held her compass in both hands, feeling its weight soothe the way it seemed to steady her breathing. For years, she had carried it like a relic, never daring to let it speak for her. Now it felt less like a secret and more like a key. She raised her chin, shoulders settling into a quiet resolve. "I'll bring it," she said at last, the words trembling but firm. "To the hearing. I'll show them." Carol's smile widened, relieved. "I'll stand with you," she promised. Ruth's hand squeezed Ellie's shoulder. "And so will I." Ellie closed the folder, the compass still in her grasp. The hymn outside swelled into O come, Emmanuel, the voices filling the air with a solemn promise. She let the sound wash over her, let it anchor her decision. The photograph slipped back into the folder, the compass into her purse, but the choice remained in her chest, solid as stone. She exhaled, steady at last. The choir's carol lingered as she rose from her chair, carrying with it the faintest sense of hope. Ellie closed the file and whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. "Maybe it's time." And as the voices swelled, she knew the decision was no longer tentative. It was set. On a snowy evening, the town hall fills with chatter for the Veterans Day recognition program. Folding chairs scrape across the hardwood floor, kids rustle candy wrappers, and a brass band in the corner tests its horns with half-finished notes. The air carries the smell of hot cider poured into styrofoam cups, mingling with the sharper scent of pine wreaths hung at the windows. Outside, snowflakes swirl beneath the streetlights, but inside the room hums with warmth and anticipation. Ellie Hart walks in quietly, her scarf flecked with white, her purse tucked close. Around her neck hangs the silver compass, its lid polished by years of use. The chain catches a strand of candlelight from the memorial display near the stage, sending a small flash across the room. A few eyes notice, then look away, dismissing it as nothing more than a keepsake. Frank Dwyer notices too. He leans toward another councilman, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Even seals missed their shots," he sneers. "And she claims glory." A ripple of snickers rises, swallowed quickly, when the bandleader raps his stand. Ellie's cheeks warm, but she keeps moving, each step deliberate, her boots clicking softly against the old wooden floor. Pastor Ruth, standing near the podium, raises a hand. "Ellie, would you join us?" Her tone is calm, steady like a bell rung to call attention without force. Ellie hesitates in the aisle, the compass heavy against her chest. The room is watching, curiosity mixed with doubt, but also with the restless energy of a community waiting for someone to speak. Ellie climbs the few steps, her hand brushing the worn banister. She places the compass carefully on the podium, the chain coiling beside it, like a small river of silver. For a moment she says nothing, only opens her purse and produces the file Carol had given her. Carol steps forward, sets the folder beside the compass, and flips it open to the photograph. The faint engraving EH with the unit code gleams in the light. The hum of chatter ebbs away. People lean in their folding chairs, whispering to neighbors, pointing at the document, the compass. The choir children, restless only moments before, settle into a soft hum, their warm-up notes filling the silence with a fragile kind of reverence. Carol clears her throat. "This file is from our own Maplewood archives. It records a commendation classified at the time for a rescue operation decades ago. The name was redacted, but the object described is this compass. The engraving matches." She lets the words settle, and the initials are clear, EH. Eyes shift to Ellie. Some skeptical, some startled, others wide with a new respect. Frank frowns, tapping his envelope against his leg, as if to remind himself he still holds authority. Ellie rests her hand lightly on the compass lid. Her voice begins quiet, wavering, then steadies. It was a winter night. Not far from here, but cold enough that sound carried forever. Lives were at stake, and the choice wasn't about firing a shot. It was about waiting, about restraint, about precision. She pauses, the memory brushing against her words. I carried this compass because it reminded me that sometimes the surest aim is patience. The room is still. Children stop fidgeting, grown men lean forward, women clasp their hands in their laps. The story doesn't need detail. The tone in her voice carries the truth. She doesn't brag, doesn't dramatize. She simply tells it like a memory long kept in the quiet. When she finishes, silence holds the room. It isn't the silence of dismissal anymore, but of awe. The kind of hush that comes when people realize they've misjudged someone standing right in front of them. Ellie lets the silence rest, feeling its weight shift from burden to recognition. The brass band doesn't stir. The children's humming fades into nothing. Even the hiss of the radiator seems to pause. All eyes are on Ellie and the compass, and for the first time in years, she feels seen without being scrutinized. From the back, Frank mutters just loud enough for his words to travel. There's more she's not saying. His tone carries skepticism, needling the crowd, trying to plant doubt where awe had taken root. A few heads turn, brows furrow, tension creeping back into the air. Ellie doesn't answer. She lets her hand rest on the compass lid, her breath steady. The room holds its balance on the edge of change, caught between revelation and resistance. Frank mutters, there's more she's not saying, sowing seeds of doubt. Tension rises again. The next morning at Betty's diner, tension hangs in the air. Locals crowd the booths, their conversations circling around the same event the night before at the town hall. Steam rises from pancakes drowned in syrup, and the smell of maple hangs heavy, but the chatter has an edge to it. Ellie sits at her usual booth, the silver compass placed openly on the table for the first time. Its lid catches the morning light, not hidden in a purse, but resting where anyone can see. Frank Dwyer arrives late, shaking snow from his coat, his mouth already set in a tight line. He claims a seat near the counter, lifting his voice enough for the room to hear. Paperwork means nothing, he declares. A file, an old trinket. It doesn't prove she saw real action. Folks around here get carried away with stories. His laugh is brittle, the kind meant to gather agreement, and a murmur runs through the diner like a low wind. Ellie doesn't flinch, but the heat in her cheeks betrays her. She keeps her eyes on the compass, fingers brushing its edge. For a moment, doubt presses in again, threatening to reclaim the ground she had won. Around her, voices stir, half whispers, half questions. The air feels tight, crowded. Mary strides forward, coffee pot in hand. The sound of it slamming onto Frank's counter space rings louder than his words. "That's enough, Frank," she says firmly, her eyes sharp. "We were all there. We saw the proof. You don't get to laugh it away." The diner stills. Even the griddle seems to quiet under the weight of her tone. Frank opens his mouth, but Mary doesn't give him room. She pours Ellie's mug full and sets it back gently, the contrast to her slam deliberate. On the house, she says her kindness meant for Ellie, her defiance meant for everyone else. The room shifts, the crowd aware that the line has been drawn. At a corner booth, a pair of choir teens glance at each other. One rises, face pale but steady, and places his hand over his heart. The gesture spreads faster than words. Another teen follows, then two women near the window, then Joe from his crossword seat. Chairs scrape back as neighbors stand silent, but resolute, facing Ellie. The diner falls into reverent quiet. The air is thick with it, heavier than smoke, steadier than song. Ellie lifts her gaze, stunned. Outrage that had swirled against Frank transforms into something larger, a justice carried not by argument, but by action. 100 eyes do not mock her, now they honor her. Pastor Ruth adds her presence without speaking, rising slowly, and resting her hand on the back of Ellie's booth. The silence grows not awkward, but sacred, each heartbeat, a measure of unity. The compass on the table gleams in the winter light, no longer a dismissed relic, but a symbol everyone shares. Frank mutters, "This is absurd," but his words fall flat. Nobody laughs this time. The authority he once commanded dissolves in the quiet strength of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. His face flushes as he pulls at his coat, suddenly smaller in a room he used to fill. Ellie swallows hard, her throat dry. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't sought it. The compass had been her private anchor, not a banner to wave. She touches the lid, gently, voice almost a whisper, but carrying to those nearest. "I never asked for this." Her eyes glisten, the light of the compass mingling with tears. The humility in her words only deepens. The silence stirs something older than gossip, respect born from seeing clearly at last. Ellie's eyes glisten as she whispers, "I never asked for this." A month later, on Christmas Eve, the library glows with string lights, children's voices drifting down from the choir, practicing upstairs. The tall windows shine with frost, and the main hall has been dressed for the season, garlands wound around banisters, a pine tree near the door strung with handmade ornaments, and tables laid with cinnamon cookies and mugs of hot cider. The townsfolk gather in coats and scarves, stamping snow from their boots, before stepping into the warm hush. Ellie Hart stands near the front, her scarf tucked neatly, her hands folded around a paper program. Carol is beside her, cheeks flushed with the work of organizing the night's dedication. The hum of anticipation is low but steady, a small-town current that carries everyone forward. Tonight, the library is not just a place for books, it is a place for memory. At the center of the hall, a new glass case has been set up beneath a string of white bulbs. Under the cloth covering a shape is faintly visible, familiar to Ellie, even hidden. Carol steps to the podium, tapping it lightly for attention. The voices' quiet chairs creak as people turn. "Thank you all for being here," she begins. "This library has always been a home for our town's stories. Tonight we add one more." She lifts the cloth. Beneath the glass, resting on a small velvet cushion, lies Ellie's compass. Its lid shines under the lights, initials faint but clear, the chain curled like a question finally answered. Gasps ripple softly, followed by silence. The case is simple, but the weight of what it holds transforms it into something sacred. Ellie feels her breath catch, not with nerves this time, but with a strange peace. Carol looks at her. Ellie chose to give this to Maplewood, so future generations can see and remember. Not just an object, but what it stands for: courage, patience, and the quiet kind of strength. Applause swells, then stills again as Pastor Ruth steps forward. Ruth's voice carries calm and full. Sometimes the quietest among us carry the greatest weight. Sometimes they bear it alone for far too long. Tonight, we honor a life that reminds us silence does not mean absence and humility does not erase truth. Her words hang like garland across the room, binding people together in agreement. Ellie keeps her eyes on the compass in the case. It is no longer hers alone, no longer tucked away in the dark of her purse. She feels both lighter and more visible, as if she has stepped from shadow into steady light. Around her, neighbors nod. Some smile, some wipe at their eyes. Children tug at their parents' sleeves, whispering questions about the object in the glass, and Carol bends to explain in gentle tones. Frank Dwyer lingers at the back, hands in his coat pockets, face taut with something between pride and shame. After the applause fades, he approaches quietly. He doesn't look her in the eye at first, only mutters, "I might have been too quick before. Didn't see the whole picture." His words stumble like a man unused to apology. Ellie studies him a moment, then nods once. "It matters that you came." She doesn't offer more, and he doesn't press. For him, the silence is answer enough. The choir upstairs begins to sing the first notes of Silent Night, floating down the staircase like snowflakes. The sound settles over the hall, mingling with the glow of the tree, the scent of cinnamon cookies, the warmth of bodies gathered close. Children laugh near the cookie table, their joy light as bells. Mary, wiping her hands on her apron from helping serve cider, catches Ellie's gaze and gives a small nod of pride. The climax is quiet, not thunder, but harmony. The compass glimmers under glass as the choir swells. Children press against the case to see it more closely, and townsfolk stand shoulder to shoulder, their story now joined to hers. Ellie feels the moment etch itself into the memory of the place, into the wood beams, the frosted windows, the breath of everyone present. Her life once overlooked is written into Maplewood's fabric. Later, when the crowd begins to thin and laughter drifts out into the snowy street, Ellie slips to a bench near the window. Outside, snow falls soft and steady, covering the sidewalks in white. Across the square, lights glow in shop windows, and from a distant porch radio comes the voice of Bing Crosby, mellow and familiar. She draws her scarf closer, listens to the song, and whispers to herself, almost in wonder, "Maybe I was never invisible." The words are not for anyone else, only for the night, but they feel true at last. Snow pressed softly against the library windows that night, and inside the hall, the warmth of cider cookies and children's laughter carried a hush of peace, the kind of quiet that follows storms when order has been restored. Neighbors who once whispered in doubt had already stood in unison at the diner, and that simple act of outrage turned to justice is what opened the way for Ellie's compass to shine openly, here no longer dismissed as a trinket, but received as history. It reminded them that kindness given without asking for return, and a life lived without demanding notice, can change how a whole town remembers. Like a lamp left in a winter window, steady and unassuming, her compass became a guide through the long nights, showing that what is overlooked may still hold the truest light. And so the case in Maplewood's library and the small scholarship in her husband's name carry the story forward, urging each neighbor to let their own quiet gesture of kindness be placed where it can warm others.